This fall, we're focusing on creating a more authentic and joy-filled life by knowing our enoughness, being brave, and accepting vulnerability. And this week, we're doing some myth busting. We're busting those myths about vulnerability because there's a lot of things that get in our way sometimes of wanting to take the plunge. And the first is that vulnerability equals weakness. And this in part comes from the idea that having feelings is weakness. Now, I've been criticized isn't quite the right word, but we're going to go with it because I haven't come up with a better word. I've been criticized for having intense emotions.
Shame on you.
Right? Shame on me, yeah. So, especially, what we call negative emotions, because, like I'll get really fired up and excited about something. I've been told, keep it down. But, so when I first discovered Brene Brown's work, it was a big deal for me because what she finally put into words that made sense to me was in this work that she does on vulnerability and wholeheartedness is that feeling emotions is an essential element, and the more vulnerable we allow ourselves to be, the more we are able to really feel our emotions. And so if you have a lot of inhibitions to feeling feelings, it's not that you don't get to pick which ones you don't get to feel or that you do get to feel. So if having feelings is not happening, if I'm not allowing any feelings, that means I don't get to feel joy with the intensity, just as I don't feel sadness with intensity. So when I found out about this research, and she put it together in a way that made sense, I was pretty excited, because it really helped me put some understanding around it. And so if there was words that people thought they needed to say about my emotional state, I had other words to share with them. And that is, yeah, I might feel sadness intensely, but what I know in that moment is that this is awesome. And it's a blessing to be able to feel sadness that intensely, because it also means that I get to feel joy that intensely. And I get to feel love and excitement and all of the other stuff. So I'll take it. It's okay. And it won't last. Because I get to have all those, if it means having this kind of, if I get the high highs and the low lows instead of just having the I'll take it. It's okay. And so that's about the feeling part. But the root of the word vulnerable is the Latin vulnere, which means to wound or to be capable of wounding. Weakness is the inability to withstand attack. So you see, vulnerability and weakness are not the same thing. Those are they don't go together. Now, in the book, she has 4 pages of examples about what it looks like and feels like to be vulnerable. These are things like going on the first date after my divorce, laying off employees, waiting for the biopsy to come back. That's what vulnerability looks like. That's not weakness. Or it could feel like burying your belly in the face of the enemy, or free falling, or being halfway across the tightrope and moving forward and going back are both as scary. Those are just a few. It's not weakness. So it's interesting. So these are what's scary, what's difficult, brave, authentic. Those are really what the words of being vulnerable to me sound like. And it's funny because we're drawn to and we're interested in when people are vulnerable and they share authentically. And we see that as a good trait in other people, right? But we're scared as heck to be that ourselves. sometimes. And isn't that an interesting thing just to notice and go, oh, well, maybe, for us it's like, whoa, no, but you can do that. Something to think about. So myth number 2 is I don't do vulnerability. Sort of like, well, I'm a fill in the blank, I'm a lawyer, so I don't do vulnerability. Whatever your fill in the blank is, right? Now, some of you know my husband Bill and I have been kind of working our way through the Star Trek Empire. And this statement, I don't do vulnerability, makes me think of Lieutenant Worf. Because he's a Klingon. And so what he'll do is he'll be like, well, Klingons don't do that. When his, crewmates say, well, hey, Worf, why don't you da-da-da-da? He's like, Klingons don't do that. He says very seriously. And, of course, usually he ends up figuring out that he should do that. But I think that it's just for him an excuse, right? Klingons don't do that, to do anything that would make him vulnerable. Actually, vulnerability is his Achilles heel, I think. Because here's the thing, we all do vulnerability in one way or another. So thinking that you don't is just you trying to pretend, Because vulnerability means that we're capable of being wounded. And if we remember that, well, when we care for others, that means we're putting us in a position where we could get hurt. I mean, that's how it happens. When we express passion for a cause, or sadness for a loss, or determination to reach a goal, even if you think, I have no vulnerability, I'm just I'm on this college MBA track, whatever, that's what I'm doing. Well, that's what your thing is, and there is a vulnerability in that. Whenever you do that. So, we can't escape vulnerability, so just stop it. I guess it's the short version of it. Yeah, we all have vulnerabilities, and it's okay. It's okay. So, myth number 3 is that vulnerability is letting it all hang out. And she said it so well, I'm just going to read to you what she said about that. Vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing. It's not purging. It's not indiscriminate disclosure. And it's not celebrity-style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of the trust-building process. So if we remember that the definition of vulnerability is capable of being wounded, then we see that people sharing outrageous things in public situations, they're really sharing things they don't care if the world knows, even though it may seem the other way around. And I think that sometimes those things are a smoke screen. Well, if I show you this big thing that's shiny, you won't notice the real me over here, right? Just something to notice about, our world. And it takes time to build up trust with someone, to be vulnerable. And, when we first meet someone, we don't usually tell them our deepest secrets, our medical history, or our financial situation, unless, of course, they happen to be a professional in that field in which we're employing to help us with one of those things. Otherwise, that's an interesting kind of way that we get to those details very quickly. But otherwise, we don't usually share those things the first time we meet someone. And so how do we become that authentic, more vulnerable, more real self? It takes time, like everything. I know, I'm always like, takes time, meditate. Those are the 2 things I say all the time, right? So we make choices and we pay attention. So some of you know that both of my parents are computer programmers. And so when I would go sometimes on a Saturday and hang out with my dad at the office when he needed to do some work, I would get to play with the stencils that did flowcharts. Because that was what he had. So I think, flowcharts are something I think are really kind of interesting, right? Because this was part of my ingrained world. So I think that when you're becoming more vulnerable or becoming more connected to someone, you can think of it like a flow chart, right? Okay, well, you know, when I connected with them and we talked about such and such, they were really thoughtful about it. So then, yes, right? Or, you know, they really didn't seem to be very open-minded. Well, that might be a maybe, you know, or whatever. And then you just kind of keep working your way, and that's okay because it helps you understand, well, some relationships will always just be acquaintances. And you kind of work your way into that more deeper, more vulnerable situation. And that's just, I mean, these are things that we know because we've had relationships with people, but I think sometimes it's good to take a step back and like look at what are the mechanics of how this actually works. Because sometimes we've seen things like relationships with connections with people sort of drift away, and we wonder what that's about. And the thing is to keep these deep, vulnerable, emotional connection relation, we have to keep staying in that cycle of connection. And sometimes emotional disengagement happens. The research says that emotional disengagement happens long before you might actually be disconnected. You know, it might on the surface look like that. And this is an interesting conundrum that I've seen happen with people, you know, on their spiritual journey who are going through big changes, because maybe they realize a certain relationship isn't working, but they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so instead they drift and they become emotionally disengaged, which actually I think is more painful. But, you know, what do you do, right? And then I've also seen people manage to stay really connected in a deep way with people who are very different from them. You know, some people say, well, we just grew apart. Sometimes during that growth, people manage to stay connected. It does happen. And I don't think that there's one right way. I think that being true to the trust that's been built up between people and endeavoring to act in love and not betray that trust even if you're not connected with that person anymore is really important. And of course, when we go within and we remember and we act with love and compassion, if we always act with love and compassion, I think we'll do okay, right? So myth number 4 is we can do it alone. Sort of like number 2, that I'm all, you know, that I don't do it. But myth number 4 is that we can do it alone. Which means we don't have to be any vulnerable because we got this. Now, my friend Stephanie posted this on her Facebook the other day, and I asked her if I could share her story with you because it was so perfect, and I was so proud of her because she posted on her Facebook how frustrated she was about getting anything done. She's got an 11-month-old, her husband and her run several businesses, and they've got some middle school age kids too, which they have some of the time. Sometimes they're with their moms. And so it was a typical frustration of a person in that situation with all the stuff going on. The kid doesn't want to be left alone. You know, he wants to be on mama and mom's trying to do stuff and all of that stuff. Just the normal kind of thing. And then a day or two later, she posted how she had deleted the first post because she was feeling like she was complaining and she wasn't allowed to complain. Even though it wasn't really complaining, she was just expressing her frustration. And she didn't want to show up like that. And then she realized that maybe she should have kept it up because it was authentic. And so it was kind of sort of like she was in this place. But what was great for her about having shared what she shared was that because she said something's not working for me, she connected with several potential solutions. Several people said, you know, I can hang out with the kid for a little bit, you know, like things like that. And she also connected with several other moms who are now working on figuring out a way to do a nanny sharing kind of situation. You know, none of them need a nanny all the time, but together they, you know, but none of that would have happened if she hadn't said something. But we're so caught up in like, I can do it. Nah. So this is a great example of what can happen when we're willing to say, I need help, something isn't working me. And it seems like there's such a high social emphasis on being self-sufficient. And, you know, we all have struggles. We all need help sometimes. And it's amazing, like in Stephanie's situation, how quickly a solution can show up when we're willing to say, I can't do this alone. Because it's amazing when someone who's not standing where you're at, someone who's standing over here might say, oh, well, I can see the problem. I could, you know, I know the solution. Or I know someone who knows the solution. I've heard several people in our group share stories about how they're very, 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 very reticent to ask for help or ask for a favor. So, I just want to say, get over it. And I say that in the nicest way possible, but you know, it's okay to say, I need help with this. It's okay. Because that puts us in the flow of giving and receiving, in the flow of sharing. Isn't that where we want to be? We can't always give. We need to let it be okay to receive. And to receive, well, it certainly helps if someone knows what we want to receive, don't you think? So, and I mean, yeah, being in that flow of giving, receiving, being in the flow, that's everything. You don't want to be stagnant. We've talked about what happens when we get stagnant. We don't want to do that, so let's not. Okay? Let's just let it be okay to give help, receive help, give help. It feels good. So let's remember that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It is brave. It is more brave because we're willing to say, I'm open to potential harm. It's, you know, I'm open to potential harm. But I'm open to potential harm because that way I can experience life more fully and with more joy and with more connection and more love. And isn't that worth it?